Hi ladies and gentlemen, and Krzysztof the Polish Geek welcomes you to the first video of our The Witcher marathon, starting of course with the very first Witcher. And does this game hold up? Well, gameplay wise it is pretty questionable, and plenty of people actually find the gameplay frustrating, and you can see plenty of videos on YouTube basically saying that the gameplay wise it has aged so badly and it's completely unplayable. Not for me it's still very playable, but story wise though I say no, absolutely not. It's still one of the most brilliant stories ever told in video games, and if anything, when you look at the stories in modern video games, not only it hasn't aged badly, I'm gonna say it totally stood the test of time. But gameplay wise, as I just said, is a different beast, and we'll very much delve into it. And I will have to mention one more thing though. I actually first played the original Witcher back in 2007 actually, and I still remember how much I really enjoyed the game then, and I was actually pretty impressed by it with the plenty of things the game could do back then. So you can see that in 2007 it was kind of different than it is now, seeing how far gaming has come. And another thing I have to mention is that in 2007 there was also the time when Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End came out, and only like a few weeks ago, actually, I did a ranking on all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and yes, that was also a time where I saw Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End in theaters, and it's still one of my best memories and one of my most memorable theater experiences ever, actually. I mean, yeah, it hardly relates to The Witcher, but sorry, couldn't resist, had to mention it because I just have so many fond memories of this year, like first Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, and then the Witcher game. So, where does The Witcher 1 hold up, and where it did indeed age kinda badly? The most amazing thing about the first Witcher is the brilliant and incredible story, and we'll talk about it later though. Let's first focus on the gameplay, because the gameplay is the thing that plenty of modern gamers actually seem to have most problems with, because yes, admittedly it is pretty flawed at parts. The biggest drawback of the gameplay of The Witcher 1 is that I see a lot of people online talking about is the combat system, and I have to admit, it's not objectively great, but personally I don't think it's all bad either, and considering I really love beating that game from time to time, clearly it's completely manageable to me, but it's certainly and clearly not manageable for everyone, and I also tend to get frustrated with it sometimes. Like as Geralt, you have two swords, silver sword for monsters and steel sword for humans, and sometimes it can actually get confusing which is which, and Geralt often tends to miss hitting his targets regardless of which sword he picks. And I actually think the way Geralt actually moves does look really awesome and badass, and when you do actually manage to hit a target and defeat him, it's really rewarding and satisfying. But also there are many ways in which the combat can improve, such as also having a separate slot for group combat and for defeating an individual enemy. And again, I really adore the game, it's one of my favorites, but I also gotta be objective in my reviews, and there is nothing with criticizing something you love sometimes. I also see some defense of the combat saying that, oh, it's not bad, it's just very old and newer players have hard time getting used to it, but that's objectively not true. Like, there are actually plenty of older players who were actually frustrated with the combat already back in the day, and plenty of reviewers who very much love older games, like Mark the Cyborg, whom I interviewed at one point on this channel, or Synthetic Man, who also very much hate the combat, and these guys very much love to play older video games, so clearly it's not just aging badly, clearly there is a lot more to it than that. I guess you could say that the biggest problem of the combat is that they are clearly trying very much to combine like a real-time combat with turn-based combat, and I think that really doesn't work in the game's favor. Honestly, I think that ideally it's better just choose one or the other. I personally feel this game would benefit from a real-time combat, kind of like the one in the first Templar, a game I reviewed last year actually. Literally a year from now, I reviewed the first Templar, and while the game has lots of things gameplay-wise in common with The Witcher, I think it has a better combat in the form of real-time combat. And I think if The Witcher had real-time combat, I think the combat would be a lot less frustrating for a lot of people. And clearly, the producers learned from their lessons, since the subsequent two games very much have real-time combat. I do also want to talk about the enemy variety in this game, which is actually pretty good, especially for a game made all the way back in 2007, and lots of them are inspired by creatures of Eastern European and Slavic folklore, and I really love that. And there are also some monsters that you'd expect in classic fantasy in general, although still given pretty Slavic flavor on that. This is awesome, but there are also human enemies as well, which is pretty consistent with the game's themes. There are bandits as well as members of an evil organization, Salamandra, and we'll talk more of it soon enough. And the boss battles are pretty good story-wise and the physical design-wise, but as for the gameplay-wise, well, again, depends on how much you actually like the gameplay of the game as a whole. One of the most frustrating parts of the game, which I actually personally find even more frustrating than the combat, is backtracking. I'm generally a guy who very much loves to backtrack and explore some of the more beautiful and immersive parts of the game's world, but Witcher 1 feels like it takes it too far sometimes. Like, often you literally just need to backtrack a very long distance to just buy a random necessary item and then go a very long way back to where you originally were. And this feels completely unnecessarily tedious. Like, Chapter 2 is especially a victim of it. Chapter 2 is actually really frustrating and really the most tedious part of the game to get through. Chapter 2 plays out like an investigation, which it is actually, and as Geralt you are required to question a few main suspects to find the culprit. However, because of this, you'll be walking back and forth in two areas for like hours in your slow walking speed, and as a result, the chapter feels like the longest and most boring chapter. Payoff is certainly pretty amazing, but it takes a lot, and I mean a lot of time and backtracking to get to it. One more thing that I personally completely don't mind, I actually quite like it, but it might unfortunately turn off a lot of people, is the overall look of the game. And I think this is mostly attributed to the fact that the game is all the way back from 2007, so it's natural that there are many people who just don't like old graphics. But I'm decidedly not one of them. I actually find them quite nostalgic. I'm one of those people that can just easily put an old PS2 or a PS1 game and just have a great time. In fact, plenty of the older games are actually some of my favorite video games, and while obviously things age, I actually quite like the look and feel of the game. Following two games also look amazing and much better technology wise, but there's just something so unique in the overall atmosphere of the game. I really love it. Now onto the actual story of the game, which, as I said, I think it is amazing. In some ways, it is actually even better from the story of The Witcher 3. In some ways, and don't get the wrong idea, The Witcher 3 story is super amazing, but I do think that there are several ways in which I think the story of the very first game is actually even better. And the story is that Geralt of Rivia has been brought back to life since he dies in the last book. I haven't read the book, so I don't have all the details, but I do know that he does die at the end of the last book. I probably should read the books at some point. But he lost all his memories, and then the Witcher fortress, Kaer Morhen, gets invaded by an evil organization called Salamandra, led by an evil mage, Azar Javed, as well as an evil assassin, the Professor. And I actually think that giving Geralt of Rivia an amnesia in which he can't remember anything was a really great idea. That way they made the game completely accessible to both the book fans as well as complete newcomers to the franchise, kinda like me basically. And then there is a young Witcher named Leo who gets killed by the professor, and Geralt swears revenge and embarks on a revenge quest to track down Salamandra, and on his journey he meets various interesting characters, as well as there are also really interesting twists and turns, and the characters are very interesting and really compelling, and there are also plenty of choices that you have to make at some points of the game. And one of the greatest things about The Witcher is that you do actually have choices offered, and they do very much have a huge effect on the end of the game, as well as plenty of other events happening in the game. Before though we talk more about the choices in the game and how much the effect they have on the game though, let's also go back a little bit to the Eastern European inspirations for the game, as well as Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is one of my favorite chapters in the whole game. It's literally one of the most amazing parts of the game. And in that chapter there are plenty of Voidonoi, and Voidonoi are clearly inspired by Eastern European creatures called Wodniks, and in the original Polish, they are actually even rightfully called Wodniks. Wodnik is an underwater lord or demon who imprisons people who wander alone around lakes, rivers, etc. And this folktale was often used by parents to discourage children from wandering around the water alone. And Wodniks or Voidonoi appear in this game, and it's one of my favorite parts of the game. But the unique thing that the game does is also that it does actually separate the good Wodniks and the bad Wodniks, and kind of actually add some Lovecraftian inspiration from them. And what's more, it even adds Dagon. You heard it right, one of the famous monsters created by none other than H.P. Lovecraft himself, appears as god of the deep and is worshipped by Wodniks, Voidonoi, and in some ways Dagon actually plays the role of the original Wodnik from Polish folklore, and it makes perfect sense. One of the most interesting and complex choices in the game that you have to make is when you have to choose to side either with the Knights of the Order of the Flaming Rose or the Scoia'tael Elves. Knights of the Flaming Rose are a religious order of knights clearly inspired by medieval European orders such as Knights Templar and Knights Teutonic. Knights of the Flaming Rose resemble Knights Templar in the way they dress, and some of the names are also very similar, but with the behavior on the other hand, I actually say they are much closer to Knights Teutonic, especially when you choose to side with the Scoia'tael. The Scoia'tael Elves are basically an elven terrorist organization who claim to be freedom fighters fighting for peace and equal rights, and they do resemble some very similar terrorist organizations in real life who claim very similar things, but I won't mention their actual real life names though. Knights of the Flaming Rose are considered religious fanatics who oppress non-humans, and they are also revealed to be behind the Salamandra all along. That said, if you side with the Knights, you realize there is actually a civil war going on in the Order between those actual radical fanatics as well as noble knights who truly believe in their duty as Knights of the Order of the Flaming Rose, and regardless of whom you choose to side with, the final boss and the main villain of the whole game is Grandmaster Jacques d'Aldesberg. Either way, we'll talk about him very soon enough. I actually prefer to side with Knights actually, since largely the fanatics are all defeated either way, and while that way, a new Grandmaster will replace Jacques d'Aldesberg. Siegfried, who is a pretty awesome and noble character, and he will choose to reform the Order into their original purpose. And the way I like to think of it, as long as Jacques is a Grandmaster despite his name, the Order is more like Knights Teutonic, while under Siegfried it becomes more like Knights Templar or Knights Hospitallers. That said, if you on the other hand side with the Scoia'tael Elves, then Siegfried does become evil and fanatical as the rest of the Order and will fanatically declare you non-human on order you killed. Hence why honestly I actually think the neutral option is actually the best option in the game. Not many people seem to like that option, even though it's my personal favorite one. It's certainly least rewarding, but it's most consistent with the character of Geralt of Rivia, as well as both sides are pretty unsympathetic really. The game will certainly be much harder at the end though, since both Knights of the Order and the Squirrels will attack Geralt. Ultimately, my personal favorite way of playing the game and making this choice is during the Vivaldi's Bank. I prefer to side with Siegfried, but much later in the game, when the Scoia'tael take the villagers hostage, but the knights also say some pretty evil fanatical things, that's when I just choose to remain neutral and abandon both sides to fight with each other. And speaking of that, I have to talk about the aforementioned Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Oldesbourg, who is the main villain of the game, and he's by far my favorite villain in all three The Witcher video games. As I said, there are elements of the story where I think the very first Witcher is actually in some ways even better than The Witcher 3, and the main villain might actually be the prime example. For a long time, there was a theory that Jacques de Oldesbourg is actually that innocent little boy Alvin whom you have to protect throughout the game and who disappears into unknown towards the end of the game. And there was a long fan speculation that Jacques de Oldesbourg is really time-traveling and fully grown-up Alvin, which was a great theory, and it was so great, interesting, it made so much sense that The Witcher 3 rightfully confirmed it, although the very ending when Geralt and Dandelion actually discover an amulet that they gave Alvin, a much older version of it, on Jacques de Oldesbourg, it's actually kind of implied that they actually figured it's Alvin, even if they don't directly say it.
Know what I found on the Grand Master? A Dimeritium pendant.
The one you gave Alvin?
I don't know. It looks the same, but older. He must have worn it under his armor for years.
A true keepsake, perhaps.
Maybe it was his way of repelling hostile magic. Or it was there to control inborn abilities, unrelenting visions.
That's something we'll never know.
It doesn't matter. Jacques de Oldesbourg, if that was his name, is dead.
Jacques de Oldesbourg, a super excellent villain, and that this really innocent little boy is the same person that as that evil, ruthless villain who's controlling the evil Salamandra all along, as well as who's also responsible for the Order of the Flaming Rose becoming evil and fanatical and who wants to exterminate all non-humans. I often say how I don't like the idea of making villains sympathetic, and not saying it never works, but generally I'm not particularly fond of that idea. But Jacques is a perfect example of how to make a villain tragic and complex, give him a very sympathetic backstory, but still prevent him from fully becoming sympathetic and still keep him very much as an evil and ruthless villain that must be stopped at all costs. Kinda like my two favorite examples of that, Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean, one of my favorite villains of all time, as well as Enrico Pucci from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stone Ocean, my favorite of all the JoJo villains. And funny how Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End was actually released in 2007, which is exactly the same year as The Witcher 1 was released. But yes, Davy Jones and Enrico Pucci are two perfect examples of villains who are complex, relatable with tragic backstories, but still very much ruthless villains who must be stopped at all cost. Jacques de Oldesbourg, I say, very much falls in the same category, and he's not only my favorite villain of the Witcher video game trilogy, but he's actually by far my favorite video game villain of all time. And to give you a true example of what makes a villain really actually sympathetic is the main villain of the second game, but we'll talk about him when I actually review the second game. Plus, even if you don't like villains with sympathetic backstories, then don't worry, the game has two other pretty amazing villains, and these guys are just plain pure evil. One of them is leader of the Salamandra, the mage Azar Javed, as well as his second in command, the Professor.
I come at your command, Master. I listen and obey as a genie would.
Professor, cut the crap and get him.
Also pretty cool villains in their own right, and fighting Azar Javed is one of the most satisfying parts of the game.
Your tricks are not.
So yes, I think the first Witcher is still very much a great game, and the story is just so excellent on every level. And comparing the story of any modern game is just an insult, because the story is just that good. Again, gameplay on the other hand is very flawed, and certainly the time hasn't been kind to it, but if you can get a hang of the gameplay and don't mind old graphics, then I think The Witcher 1 is an excellent game and a perfect way to introduce the Witcher universe to book lovers as well as newcomers. Like, I was a newcomer when I played it when it came out. I was like 12 years old at this time only, actually, and loved the game so much already. So yes, overall, I think The Witcher 1 is still a great game and the story is just so excellent on every level. The gameplay, admittedly, is pretty flawed and time has certainly not been kind to it, but I think if you can actually get a hang of the gameplay and don't mind old graphics, then I think The Witcher 1 is an amazing game with a really fantastic story and also a perfect way to introduce newcomers as well as original book fans to the Witcher video game universe. I mean, I was very much a newcomer. I first played the game actually back when it came out in 2007. I already been talking about it actually, and loved the game already back then. So yes, I very much was a newcomer when I first played the game. So the review of The Witcher 1 is complete. And now, next review, expect the review of The Witcher 2 Assassin of Kings, which story-wise is maybe not as actually great as The Witcher 1, but still a really fascinating and amazing story. But on gameplay level though, it's an improvement in every single way. And again, don't get the wrong idea. Just because I think the story is maybe not as good as the story of The Witcher 1, it's still an amazing and fascinating story that very much deserves to be experienced very much. But gameplay-wise, it's an improvement on every level, but we'll talk more about it when we actually get to The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and see you very soon in the review of The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings. See you then!